They said, accept the unpaid overtime or find another job. Then I made my 1 week plan that destroyed them. I still remember the exact shade of beige on the conference room walls when Gavin dropped the bomb. Not just any beige, the kind of institutional beige that's designed to make you forget you're alive. That's where I was sitting when he told us we'd all be working an extra 15 hours a week. Unpaid, non-negotiable. The Clark account needs all hands on deck, he said, not even looking up from his tablet. Everyone's working 55-hour weeks until the project launches. Same salary. Consider it an investment in your future with the company. I watched my coworkers' faces. Devin staring at his hands. Marissa's jaw clenched so tight I could almost hear her teeth cracking. Tina looking like she might cry. And Nico, poor Nico, who'd just become a single dad after his wife walked out, he looked physically ill. And something in me just snapped. Not outwardly. No, outwardly I was perfectly calm. I sat there, spine straight, face neutral, the way my grandmother taught me, the way I'd been sitting in rooms with men like Gavin my entire professional life. But inside, something finally broke for good. Hey, before I get too deep into this, please like and subscribe if you want more stories about corporate America messing with the wrong woman. Trust me, this one's worth sticking around for. So there I was, 38 years old, senior data analyst at Helix Financial Solutions, about to either lose my mind or change my life. I'd been at Helix for almost 4 years longer than most people lasted under Gavin Marks, our department head and genuine sociopath in Brooks Brothers. These are the expectations moving forward, he continued. We've provided dinner allowances for those evenings. He gestured to Janice from HR, who started passing out some pathetic-looking vouchers for the sad deli in our building's basement. 15 hours a week. That's 45 extra hours in my mom's home care that I'd have to cover out of pocket because I wouldn't be there. That's 3 hours of physical therapy for my shoulder that I'd miss. That's my entire life, disappearing into Gavin's precious Clark account. I raised my hand like I was back in elementary school. Gavin barely acknowledged me with a flick of his eyes. Audrey, he said, not bothering to hide his annoyance. Question. I understand the proposal, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'd like to request 7 days to adjust my schedule accordingly. He looked surprised. He expected pushback. Tears, maybe? Not reasonable accommodation requests. Fine, we start the new hours next Monday. Anything else? There was plenty else. Like the fact that what he was proposing was almost certainly illegal. Like the fact that I knew at least 3 other teams had been through this exact scenario in the past 2 years. Like the fact that my mother's progressive MS meant I was her primary caregiver, and these hours would destroy both our lives. But I just said, no, that's all. Thank you for the clarity. The meeting ended. People shuffled out, hollow-eyed. I stayed seated, gathering my notebook and pen with deliberate slowness. Gavin lingered too. Audrey, he said once we were alone, I'm glad you're being sensible about this. Some of your colleagues, he made a dismissive gesture. They don't understand what it takes to succeed here. I looked up at him. Gavin was 45, divorced twice, with the kind of carefully maintained physique that screamed, I have something to prove. He'd been brought in to optimize our department 3 years ago. Optimize, meaning squeeze more work from fewer people for less money. I understand perfectly, I said. And I did. I understood that Gavin saw us as resources to be depleted. I understood that I was supposed to be grateful for the opportunity to work myself to exhaustion. I understood that my mother's care, my health, my basic human dignity meant absolutely nothing compared to the Clark account. I'm Audrey Chen, by the way. Half Chinese, half Puerto Rican, all exhausted. Child of immigrants who worked themselves to death for the American dream, only for my dad to die of a heart attack at 52 and my mom to develop MS at 60. Been working since I was 14 years old. Never missed a deadline. Never called in sick when I wasn't. Never asked for special treatment. And I was done being a good girl. That night, I sat in my mother's kitchen after getting her settled for the night. The house I grew up in. The house I moved back to 3 years ago when Mom's condition worsened. I'd been managing okay, working full-time while coordinating her care, using my lunch breaks to call doctors, staying up late to finish projects so I could take her to appointments during the day. It was exhausting, but it was working, until now. I opened my laptop and started a document. At the top, I typed the 7-day plan. Let me be clear. I'm not a vengeful person by nature. I don't hold grudges. I don't plot against people. That's not who I was raised to be. But sometimes the universe hands you a moment of perfect clarity. A moment when you realize that playing by the rules has cost you everything. While people like Gavin Westfield sail through life breaking every rule that inconveniences them. Day 1. Reconnaissance. I went to work as usual, but with new eyes. I started carefully documenting everything. When people arrived. When they left. Who looked tired? Who looked afraid? I connected with Olivia in accounting. We'd bonded months ago over being the only women over 35 who weren't administrative staff. I asked casual questions about overtime policies, about how payroll was coded for salaried employees. Why do you ask? She said, eyebrow raised. Just trying to understand the system better, I replied. She gave me a knowing look. The system isn't designed to be understood by people like us, Audrey. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I went through all my old emails, flagging every instance where Gavin or other managers had mentioned extra hours, weekend work, or going the extra mile. I found 67 such emails from the past year alone. Day 2. I expanded my search. I remembered that Helix had an internal wiki where HR policies were stored. I'd never looked at it before. Who has time? But now I combed through every page. And there it was, in black and white. Helix Financial Solutions compensates overtime for salaried employees in accordance with federal labor laws, which was a lie, a documented company-wide lie. I also discovered something else. The company's internal messaging system kept archives of all chats, and Gavin was notorious for using chat instead of email for his most questionable directives. I found a way to search those archives. It was like opening Pandora's box. Need the team to push through this weekend. Don't log the hours officially. We'll recognize the effort at year-end reviews. Tell Santiago he needs to cancel his vacation. The Anderson project is priority. If he pushes back, remind him we're evaluating for promotions next month. Chen's mother issues are becoming a problem. Find a way to reduce her accommodation requests while keeping us legally covered. My mother issues. My mother's degenerative neurological condition was an issue that inconvenienced him. I printed everything. I saved everything. I began building my case. Day 3. I reached out to former colleagues who'd left abruptly. Casual coffee catch-ups. How's life post-Helix? 5 meetings, 5 similar stories. Marla. I worked 70-hour weeks for 6 months. When I asked about comp time, Gavin said I should be grateful for the learning opportunity. Sunil. They denied my FMLA leave when my father was dying. Said my role was too critical. I quit the day after his funeral. Javier. Gavin told me point blank that my accent was limiting my potential and suggested English lessons. On my own time, of course. Each conversation made me angrier, but also more certain. Day 4. I contacted an employment attorney. Her name was Eleanor Park, and she didn't smile when I sat down in her office. I don't have much money, I said up front. Tell me your story first, she replied. Then we'll talk about money. I laid it all out. The unpaid overtime, the systematic pattern, the documented evidence. When I finished, Eleanor leaned forward. What do you want out of this, Miss Chen? It was a good question. What did I want? Revenge? Money? Justice? I want them to stop, I said finally. I want Gavin gone. I want everyone who's owed back pay to receive it. And I want enough money to make sure my mother gets the care she needs for the rest of her life. Eleanor nodded slowly. It won't be easy. Companies like Helix have deep pockets and good lawyers. I have evidence, I said, and I have nothing left to lose. She took my case. Day 5. I continued gathering evidence, but now with legal guidance. I recorded a conversation with Gavin where he explicitly threatened my job if I couldn't commit to the new hours. Single-party consent state, completely legal. I also discovered that Helix had settled 2 previous unpaid overtime cases confidentially in other departments. Eleanor was thrilled with this information. Pattern and practice, she said. That's what we need to establish. Day 6. I prepared my presentation. Not for Gavin. For the company's general counsel and the executive leadership team that Eleanor would be contacting the following week. Spreadsheets showing hours worked versus hours paid. Documentation of all unpaid overtime for my entire department going back 3 years. Testimony from former employees. Copies of the contradictory HR policies. It was the most thorough analysis I'd ever conducted. And I'm very, very good at analysis. That night, my mother noticed something was different. I was sitting with her, helping her with her evening stretches, when she said, "Shioya, what are you planning? You have your father's scheming face." My father had been a master chess player. He'd taught me to always think 7 moves ahead. "I'm just solving a problem at work, Mom." She gripped my hand with surprising strength. "You be careful. Your father always said the most dangerous moment is when you're finally standing up for yourself." I kissed her forehead. I learned from the best. Day 7. The morning of our follow-up meeting. I dressed carefully, not my usual work clothes, but the charcoal gray suit I kept for client presentations. Pearl earrings my father gave my mother on their wedding day. Red lipstick, my armor. I arrived at the office early, printed 1 final copy of all my evidence, placed it in a sealed envelope, and waited. The conference room filled up gradually. Same beige walls, same colleagues with dark circles under their eyes. Gavin strode in last, not bothering to apologize for his lateness. "All right, people. Today, we implement the new schedule. I expect everyone to stay until at least 7 p.m. tonight to get started on the Clark deliverables." He looked around the room, daring anyone to object. "Any questions before we begin?" I raised my hand. Gavin sighed theatrically. "Yes, Audrey?" "Actually," I said, standing up slowly, "I do have a question. Did you know that requiring unpaid overtime from salaried non-exempt employees violates the Fair Labor Standards Act?" The room went completely silent. Gavin's face flushed. "I don't know what you think you're—" "And did you know," I continued, my voice stronger with each word, "that doing so as a systematic practice constitutes wage theft, or that Helix's own policies explicitly contradict this practice? Audrey, this is completely inappropriate. If you have concerns about your workload, we can discuss that privately." I smiled at him. Not a nice smile. "Oh, I've documented my concerns very thoroughly. In fact, I've documented everyone's concerns. For the past 3 years." The look on his face, confusion shifting to understanding, shifting to fear. "I'll treasure that until the day I die." "What exactly are you saying?" he demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "I'm saying I have a choice to make," I replied, picking up my bag. "I can either accept your proposal for unpaid labor, or I can walk into the meeting I've with Helix's general counsel in exactly 15 minutes. My lawyer is already waiting in the lobby. I don't think I'll ever forget the faces in that room." Devin's mouth literally hanging open, Marissa looking at me like I'd grown a second head, and Gavin watching his face cycle through disbelief, rage, and then that beautiful moment of dawning terror when he realized I wasn't bluffing. "You're making a very serious mistake," he said, voice suddenly quiet. "No," I replied, gathering my things. "I'm correcting yours." I walked out of that conference room with my heart hammering so hard, I thought it might crack my ribs. I'd never stood up to anyone like that in my life. I'd been raised to keep my head down, to work twice as hard for half the recognition, to be grateful for whatever scraps fell from the table. My mother's voice in my head, "Just be happy they hired you at all," "Oh yeah, many places wouldn't." But another voice too, my father's, "Chess isn't about one move, mija. It's about the whole board. Eleanor was waiting in the lobby as promised, elegant in a navy suit, her silver hair cut in a sharp bob. I'd emailed her everything the night before. She'd called me at midnight after reviewing it all. "This is stronger than I initially thought," she'd said. "Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed?" "There's no going back. I'm certain," I'd told her. "They've been stealing time from people's lives." Now she stood as I approached. "Are you ready?" "I think I'm going to throw up," I admitted. She smiled slightly. "That's normal. But remember, we're not asking for anything unreasonable. We're simply requesting they follow the law." The meeting with the general counsel wasn't what I expected. I'd imagined righteous confrontation, denials, threats. Instead, Vivian Lee, a woman about my age with immaculate nails and tired eyes, listened to Eleanor's presentation without interruption. She examined the evidence I'd compiled. She took notes. And then she asked me a single question. "Why this approach, Ms. Chen? Why not raise these concerns through HR channels first?" I looked her straight in the eyes. Because HR reports to the same executives who benefit from this system. Because 2 previous complaints were settled quietly with NDAs. Because I've watched good people break themselves trying to meet impossible demands while being told they should be grateful for the opportunity. She held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. "I'll need time to review this thoroughly. We'll be in touch within 48 hours. Eleanor seemed pleased as we left. That went better than expected. Vivian's reputation is solid. She won't bury this. I wasn't so sure. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me shaky and nauseous. What happens now? Now you go home, you wait, and you prepare for either a reasonable settlement offer or a protracted legal battle. I went home, but I couldn't rest. I paced around my mother's kitchen, jumping every time my phone buzzed. Mom watched me with concerned eyes, but didn't ask questions. She'd spent 30 years married to my father. She understood that some battles needed to be fought in silence. I didn't go to work the next day, or the day after. I called in sick, which wasn't a lie. The stress had me throwing up every few hours. I'd risked everything, my job, my reputation, my ability to care for my mother on this one calculated move. On the morning of the 3rd day, Eleanor called. "They want to meet. Today. With you, me, Vivian Lee, and the CEO. The CEO, Julian Winters himself, the man whose face was on the company website, whose compensation package had been featured in Business Insider last year. $15 million annually to run a company that wouldn't pay its analysts for extra hours worked. What does that mean? I asked. It means they're taking this very seriously. Be here at 1 p.m., wear something professional, but not flashy. I chose a simple black dress, professional enough for a meeting with a CEO, somber enough for the funeral of my career. Because let's be honest, no matter how this ended, I was never working in financial services again. Word would spread. Audrey Chen, troublemaker, whistleblower, not a team player. My mother squeezed my hand before I left. "Whatever happens," she said in Mandarin, "I am proud of you for standing up." The meeting took place in a conference room I'd never been in before. On the executive floor, the table was real wood, not laminate. The chairs had proper lumbar support. The view was of the river, not the parking garage. Julian Winters didn't look like his website photo. He was older, grayer, with deep lines between his eyebrows. Vivian Lee sat beside him, along with a man who wasn't introduced, but had outside counsel written all over his expensive suit. Eleanor and I sat across from them. I folded my hands in my lap to hide their trembling. "Miss Chen," Julian began without preamble, "I've reviewed your materials and consulted with our legal team. The evidence you've presented is concerning." I said nothing. Eleanor had coached me. Let them talk first. Don't volunteer information. Don't get emotional. If your allegations are substantiated, he continued, they represent a significant departure from Helix's values and policies. I almost laughed. Values? The only value Helix cared about was on the quarterly earnings report. We take labor compliance very seriously. Vivian added. So seriously that this has been happening for at least 3 years under your watch? The words escaped before I could stop them. Eleanor touched my arm lightly. A warning. Julian's expression tightened. Miss Chen, I understand you're upset, but I'm trying to address the situation constructively. With all due respect, Mr. Winters, this isn't a situation. This is systematic wage theft affecting dozens of employees. This is a department head explicitly threatening people's jobs if they don't work unpaid overtime. This is your company creating a culture where people have to choose between their livelihoods and their basic rights. The room went silent. I hadn't raised my voice, but I might as well been shouting. Finally, Julian nodded. You're right. And that's why I'd like to propose a resolution. What followed was surreal. Julian outlined a comprehensive settlement proposal. Gavin would be placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. An independent auditor would review all overtime practices across the company. Any affected employees would receive back pay for documented overtime, plus interest. And I would be offered a new position, compliance analyst, in the general counsel's office with a significant salary increase. Additionally, Julian said, we're prepared to offer you personally a settlement of $500,000 in recognition of the discomfort this situation has caused. $500,000. Enough to pay for my mother's care for years. Enough to make up for the career I'd likely torpedoed. What's the catch? I asked. Standard confidentiality agreement. You couldn't discuss the specific terms of the settlement, but I could still participate in the investigation, still help identify other affected employees. Julian glanced at Vivian, who nodded. Yes, we want this resolved properly. And Gavin? What happens to him? That depends on the investigation findings, Vivian said carefully. But based on what you've provided, I think it's unlikely he'll return to his current role. I looked at Eleanor, who gave me a small nod. This was a good offer, better than we expected. I need to think about it, I said. Of course, Julian replied. Take the weekend. We'll reconvene on Monday. As we left the building, Eleanor was practically giddy. This is an excellent outcome, Audrey. They're scared. They know you could take this public file with the Department of Labor, trigger a company-wide audit. Why are they being so reasonable? I asked, still suspicious. Because you did your homework, because your documentation is impeccable, and because Julian Winters is smart enough to know that the cost of fighting this, both financially and reputationally far, exceeds the cost of making it right. I spent the weekend in a daze, explaining everything to my mother, who listened with wide eyes and then hugged me fiercely. Your father would be so proud, she whispered. He always said you were the smartest one in the family. On Monday, I accepted their offer, with one modification. I wanted to be part of the team redesigning the overtime policies. I wanted to make sure this couldn't happen again, even after I was gone. And yes, I knew I wouldn't stay at Helix forever. No matter what title they gave me, I'd always be the woman who brought receipts. But I could use my time there to fix what was broken. To make things a little fairer for the people who came after me, Gavin was fired 3 weeks later. The independent audit found that his department wasn't the only one with unpaid overtime issues. All in all, Helix paid out nearly $7 million in back pay to current and former employees. They instituted a new time tracking system for all salaried staff. They revised their policies. And me? I used part of my settlement to hire full-time help for my mother. I took an actual vacation for the first time in years. I started sleeping through the night again. The new job was different, better hours, more respect, but also isolating. Some people avoided me, afraid I was taking notes on their behavior too. Others treated me like some kind of workplace folk hero, which was just as uncomfortable. 6 months later, I left Helix. The settlement had no non-compete clause, so I took a position with the State Labor Department, investigating wage theft complaints. The pay was less, but the work mattered more. Gavin? Last I heard, he was working for a startup in Austin. I almost feel sorry for his new employees. Almost. Sometimes I think about that conference room. about how my entire life changed because I decided to stop accepting the unacceptable, about how many people spend their entire careers swallowing their rage, dimming their light, giving away their time because they've been convinced they have no choice. You do have a choice. It might be hard, it might be terrifying, but it's there. My name is Audrey Chen, and I refuse to work unpaid overtime. It cost me my comfort zone, my professional reputation in some circles, and nearly gave me an ulcer from stress. But it gave me back something I didn't even realize I'd lost: my voice. If you're watching this and something in your gut is saying, "That's happening to me too," listen to that voice. Document everything, know your rights, find allies, and remember that the most powerful chess move isn't always the most obvious one. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And let me know in the comments if you've ever had to stand up against workplace exploitation. I read every comment. And I'm building a community of people who refuse to be taken advantage of. We're stronger together. And if you're a manager or executive watching this, take a hard look at your own practices. Because somewhere in your company, there might be another Audrey, and she's taking notes.